Madam President, today, the Senate is expected to vote on the nomination of Sylvia Matthews Burwell to be the next Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. I expect her to be confirmed, and I expect that she'll receive a fair number of votes from both sides of the aisle. I, for one, plan to vote in favor of confirming Ms. Burwell, and I believe she is well qualified and well suited for this position. But let's be clear, Madam President, if Ms. Burwell is confirmed, she will have a difficult job ahead of her, particularly when it comes to the implementation of the so-called Affordable Care Act. And while I support Ms. Burwell's nomination, no one should mistake that to mean that I have somehow softened in my resolve against Obamacare. Indeed, I am as committed as ever to repealing and replacing this horribly misguided law. I hold this position not due to politics or partisanship, but due to the very real problems this law is causing for our citizens, for our government, and for our nation's health care system. I would like to take a few minutes today to talk about some of the specific problems we're seeing with Obamacare and what some of my colleagues and I are doing to address them. As we all know, under the so-called Affordable Care Act, states are required to have an online exchange where citizens can go to purchase health insurance. The law gives the states the option of creating their own exchange, using an exchange provided by the federal government, or using a hybrid of the two. The Department of Health and Human Services gave every state $1 million to fund research and analysis to determine what type of an exchange they would use. Additional grants were given in two stages for those states who chose to build all or part of their own exchanges. On top of that, HHS awarded 7 early innovator grants to states who decided early on to build their own exchanges in order to help support the development and early implementation of the necessary information technology systems. All told, states received $4.7 billion from HHS to assist them in building their exchanges. The problem we're seeing now is that apparently this money was just handed out with little or no accountability. At least 7 states have failed to build a successful website and exchange, even though they received and accepted federal taxpayer dollars specifically for that purpose. Now, these states are scrambling to either rebuild their entire systems or to transition to the federal exchange. These 7 states received roughly $1.3 billion from HHS to build their exchanges. That's $1.3 billion with a B to just 7 states in the Union. That's more than 1/4 of the total amount HHS provided to states for the purpose of building their own state health care exchanges. And apparently, these states have little or nothing to show for it. In fact, at least 3 of them are looking to drop their own exchanges entirely and use the federal exchange instead now. You heard that right, Madam President. 3 states who between them received hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government to build their exchanges now want to abandon the prospect entirely and join the federal exchange. Let's keep in mind that adding them to the federal exchange will not be simple, nor will it be cheap. More millions will be spent to transition these states, along with any other states that may choose the same course in the future, into the federal exchange. This is simply preposterous, Madam President. Where is the accountability? Where is the outrage from HHS over those lost and misspent funds? There doesn't seem to be any. For her part, the President's nominee to run HHS, Ms. Burwell, has at least acknowledged that there's a problem here. During her confirmation hearing in the Finance Committee, I asked her whether states who have negligently mismanaged their exchange funds should be required to reimburse the taxpayers for those losses and for their failures. Her answer was somewhat encouraging. She said that if she was confirmed, she would want to get to the bottom of this problem and, quote, use the full extent of the law to get those funds back for the taxpayers, unquote. Unfortunately, in answer to my follow-up question, whether she would commit to withholding additional exchange-related funds from those failing states, she was not quite so definitive. Still, I was glad to hear her at last acknowledge the problem and make a commitment to recouping taxpayer funds lost in these debacles. If she's confirmed, I hope with all my heart that she will live up to this commitment, and I expect her to do so. That said, it is clear that if we're going to make the taxpayers whole on this matter, we're going to need to do something besides waiting around for HHS to address the problem. Indeed, if our experience has taught us anything, it's that commitments made in the context of a confirmation hearing often fall by the wayside. I don't intend to have this one fall by the wayside. That has been particularly true, though, with this administration, especially when the commitments deal with Obamacare. That's why I have joined with the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley, in an investigation into this matter. Congress needs to exercise proper oversight on this issue. We need to get answers, and we need to get them now. And one way or another, we're going to get them. Last month, Senator Grassley and I sent a letter to the CMS Administrator, Tavener, asking for information about CMS's communications with the states with regard to the difficulties they've had setting up exchanges and their use of federal funds. Like I said, Madam President, all told, these failures amount to over $1 billion in lost funds. The American people deserve to know where the money went and why it was so horribly misused. That's not all the American people deserve. They also deserve to be paid back for these losses. That's why I have joined with Senator Barrasso in introducing the State Exchange Accountability Act, a bill that will require the states to pay back these wasted funds. And every senator here, Democrat or Republican, ought to be willing to back that bill. Specifically, if enacted, our bill would require those states that operated a state exchange in 2014 and subsequently chose to use the federal exchange to repay all of their establishment and early innovator exchange grants. The bill would give them a 10-year time frame to do so. States would have to enter into an agreement with HHS to repay, at a minimum, 10% of the total grant money they received every year. States that fall under these requirements but fail to enter into such an agreement would see their federal assistance medical percentages, or FMAP, reduced by HHS. The FMAP reduction would be uniform and take place over a 10-year period and would be equal to the amount of exchange grant money the state received. Under the bill, HHS would be explicitly prohibited from reducing the amount of reimbursement the states owe the federal government. I expect some will deem this approach to be too punitive, but they shouldn't. They should not think that. I don't think anyone can reasonably dispute that this is a problem that needs to be dealt with. Our solution is reasonable and achievable. All we ask is that the states that have wasted taxpayer funds repay them within a reasonable period of time. We give these states 10 years to pay the money back. This is not punitive, Madam President. It is necessary. More than anything, the failures we're seeing with the state health care exchanges demonstrate that the Affordable Care Act has been flawed from the beginning. Indeed, it was the law itself that included an open-ended appropriation to help states build their exchanges without any mechanism to make states accountable for wasting those funds. Given these fundamental problems, I expect that we'll see more states take this route, especially if no steps are taken to make them accountable. Congressional oversight into these failings is vital, and I hope that the administration will cooperate in our effort to resolve this problem, or these problems. Our legislation is no less important. It's the only way to guarantee that the American taxpayers get their money back. But that's not all we need to do. Make no mistake, Obamacare is doing serious damage to our nation's health care system and our nation's fiscal future as well. When it comes to his health law, the president's favorite argument is the Republicans have not produced an alternative of their own. However, this is simply untrue, and I suspect the president knows that. Earlier this year, two of my colleagues and I unveiled a legislative proposal that would undo the damage Obamacare has inflicted on the American people. Unlike the Affordable Care Act, our proposal would actually reduce costs and shore up our entitlements. And it would do so without all the harmful, distortive mandates and regulations we see under Obamacare. Once again, in the immediate future, we need to solve this problem with the failed state exchanges. But we also need to keep our eyes focused on the long-term goal of repealing Obamacare once and for all and replacing it with something that will actually work for the American people. I hope that as time wears on, more of my colleagues, particularly those on the other side of the aisle, will recognize that this is what we really need to and have to do. Now, like I said, Madam President, I intend to vote today in favor of Ms. Burwell's nomination to head HHS. I have helped that process to go smoothly. I want it to go smoothly. I believe she's a good choice for this job. And I am hoping with all my heart that she'll be that good choice that she has indicated she is and that I have deduced she is. But I still have a number of concerns about the direction the agency is heading. During the course of her confirmation hearing, Ms. Burwell made two very important commitments to me. The first commitment she made was to respond promptly within 30 days to questions and inquiries submitted to HHS from members of Congress. Now, this is an important commitment, one that I hope she lives up to. Under this administration, HHS has been one of the least transparent of all federal agencies. Letters and inquiries oftentimes have been ignored entirely. And when we do receive letters in return from HHS, they're almost, in every case, unresponsive. Ms. Burwell is committed to changing that practice, and I respect her for it. It's part of the reason I led the charge to have her confirmed. Once again, I surely hope she does help change that practice. I mentioned the other major commitment she made to me earlier in dealing with the failed state exchanges. Ms. Burwell committed to doing everything in her power to retrieve the wasted taxpayer funds. This commitment is also important because thus far, HHS has refused to acknowledge many of the problems they faced in implementing the Affordable Care Act. The fact that she made this commitment to me demonstrates that she is at least willing to admit that there are some major problems with the program. I support Ms. Burwell's nomination in large part because of these commitments she's made. I hope she lives up to them. I think she has the ability to live up to them, and I have high hopes in that. No one should misread my vote today as an acknowledgement that all is now right with the world of Obamacare and at HHS, because nothing could be further from the truth. But Ms. Burwell has, for her part, acknowledged that problems exist and has committed to doing what she can to fix those problems. Under this administration, that's probably the best we can hope for. This is an important nomination. She is a very qualified woman, in my opinion. She's had some significant experiences in the federal government, and I have high hopes that she'll turn out to be a wonderful administrator at HHS. It's almost an uncontrollable, unadministrable agency. And I'm going to give her all the help that I possibly can to help get that agency under control and to help get it right again. This is important. I feel deeply about it. People in the bureaucracy know that if they work with me, I will move heaven and earth to try and help them. And it's time our government is more responsive to its citizens, more responsive to what people believed when they were confirmed, and more responsive in solving these problems that really are so significant, so costly, and so important to the American people. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.